Now it's my pleasure to introduce Erik Brooks. He's the author-illustrator of many fine books for children, including Totem Tale, If I Were a Whale, and the Washington State Book Award-winning Polar Opposites. Erik lives in Winthrop, Washington, with his wife, daughter, and 7-month-old pandemic puppy. When he's not drawing or writing, Erik teaches art and coaches cross-country and track at Liberty Bell High School. He also writes a weekly comic for the Methow Valley News, runs, skis, and plays in the woods like a wolverine. So help me in welcoming Erik Brooks.
Hello, everybody. I'm super glad to be here. Like many authors in the past, I would be visiting you at your library, but I'm happy to be here on the Zoom sort of webinar. I believe, if I'm pronouncing this correctly, we're going to spend our 10 minutes talking about how things we used to read or books that we were exposed to or not exposed to when we were kids maybe influences us as authors. And in my case, I'm an author and an illustrator. So the books we read or the books we read and the books we write is some of the ideas that we were sort of wrestling with when we were thinking about this. So I have been writing and illustrating books for about 20 years, give or take a little bit. And for me, when I think back, for sort of where I was as a kid and where I am now as an author illustrator, I grew up in Anchorage, Alaska. And that was important to me, really, because like now I live here in Winthrop in sort of the mountains. And there is this thread that goes through my life, both in this place I live, kind of in the mountains and whatnot. And then I think too, the sort of living like sort of in this out of the way place and reading books and finding these different things about my imagination, or my imagination could kind of play around with when I was a kid. And definitely, I was sort of a shy kid. So drawing was this way that I told stories to myself and that I kind of had fun using my imagination to create sort of different worlds and different characters. And that, reading books with these amazing characters and descriptions of characters or places sort of set me on some sort of path to writing and illustrating. The book that I wanted to show you that was quite important to me in terms of my trajectory as an author illustrator is this one called Need a House, Call Mrs. Mouse. And there's a couple things about this book I think that affected me as a writer and illustrator. One, the illustrations, and you can kind of even just see on the cover, they are amazing in their details. And also, like Mrs. Mouse here, she's an architect. And what is so cool about this, like for a long time I thought I wanted to be an architect, also partly because of this book. She has this job, right, where she designs these amazing houses for different animals in the forest. So there's a couple of threads here, right? Like these illustrations are fabulous. And then the sort of arc of imagination to sort of think of like, what would a fish house look like compared to a swallow's house or a list mole's house? And then, for me as an author and illustrator myself, like when I was a kid, I used to look at this and be like, oh man, like the mole's house, like that would be amazing. Like, look at that. Or, I would try to decide like which one of these houses that I like the best, like the fox's house or the lizard's house or the spider's house or whatever. So if you need a house, call Mrs. Mouse. Just this amazing exploration of the imagination and sort of designing these places and these characters that inhabited them. It's a really simple book, it's a picture book. There's not a lot of words, but the pictures tell so much of the story. And as an author illustrator myself, I love, telling the story in both words and pictures. So the other thing too about that book, like the characters, Mrs. Mouse, right? Like she's kind of realistically drawn, right? The author, the illustrator clearly studied a mouse. And so when he was creating his drawings, they're based on sort of the natural world, right? And all of us here in North Central Washington or around the state, we probably have had times or not where we've, had someone come to our classroom or we've gone for a hike and we've seen animals and we've seen sort of how sort of a cartoon version differs from an actual version, right? And when you're an illustrator, you get to make lots of choices. So in my job now as an illustrator, my drawings, they do just like the illustrator in Need a House Called Mrs. Mouse. Her name was Doris Susan Smith. My drawings, they tend to be a little more realistic. Bears don't really wear hats. Penguins and bears don't really correspond with each other. But I still base my imaginary stories on some of the realistic things that I study when I'm doing research and thinking about these characters, right? Now, that's not to say that some of my books don't have a different style, and I'll show you guys something here just a little bit, but more of my comic style. But that book from way back when I was a kid, and the hikes I used to go on in the woods, and sort of watching animals and being really interested in those animals, kind of influences my style as a writer and a storyteller, right? In a storyteller, especially in the way I tell the stories in my pictures. So Polar Opposites, this was my book that was a Washington State Book Award winner. And again, loosely connected, right, to what is real versus what is imaginary, is this idea of, in creating this story, my very first book from a long time ago is called The Practically Perfect Pajamas. And it's about a polar bear in his pajamas. But everyone always used to ask me, like, where's the penguins in the book with the polar bear? And I was like, you know what? Penguins and polar bears don't live in the same place. So again, sort of, even though this picture book is imaginary, like trying to sort of have this undercurrent of real world sort of facts and sort of ideas that works together with the rest of it. So Polar Opposites was 10 years after my first book was kind of my response to my first book. And I have a penguin and a polar bear in the same book, but it's all about how they're opposites in so many ways. And before I talk about anything else real quick, I just thought I would show you, related to that book, when an author or an illustrator is doing research, sometimes it can start with simple things like a list. So I have this list of opposites, and that was literally, I knew I wanted to do an opposites book with polar bears and penguins, but I literally just made, a list of opposites at the beginning. And then I made another list later where my polar bear Alex had all of these characteristics, and then the penguin Xena had all of these characteristics. So I know you guys can't probably read those words right here, but super simple beginnings to that story. And I literally took all these characteristics and then kind of rearranged them to tell a story. Real quickly too, and then I think I have like 3 more minutes. This is when you're an author and an illustrator and you're creating a book, this is called a book dummy. And we take our story ideas and turn them in to lots of sketches like this. So how that relates to me on some level, going way back to those first books that I used to look at, I would do a lot of drawing when I was looking at books when I was a kid. And sometimes it was literally copying the pictures, trying to draw a picture of Mrs. Mouse. And I know I drew her when I was a kid. I don't have those anymore. But that's another way that the books I read when I was a kid, the books I looked at, were influential to me as an author and illustrator. They helped me practice some of my early drawings. And I got inspired sort of reading and drawing from these books. Last thing, I think I've got 2 minutes. I don't know if that's correct. If anybody can give me a thumbs up. Yes? Okay. In addition to sort of this, some of my books being like Need a House Called Mrs. Mouse, and being kind of imaginary, but also based in realism, I've also really enjoyed, continuing to learn about different animals and continuing to sort of almost be like a scientist in some way when I am creating illustrations for other people's books. So this is a book called Who Has These Feet? And in creating these illustrations for a much more even realistic picture book like this, where it was going to be super important that you could guess who has these feet. I love studying and learning about these animals when I'm doing my illustrations. And honestly too, because I get to illustrate other authors, I get to learn so much from other people's writing and all of the research that they do. So that's a recent or fairly recent book. This is a much more recent book called If I Were a Whale. It's a board book, my first board book. It came out 2 years ago. So this is the last one I'll show you. And this is this is for a younger set of readers, right? But there still are very important things about making these illustrations look like the actual whales, so that you could tell what kind of whale these were as you read through the book. I think I'll stop there, but if you have any questions, I think you'll be able to ask them at the end. So thank you all very much, and we'll turn it over to Sundee, I believe.
Thank you so much, Erik. Yay! Okay, so our next author is Sundy Frazier. She's a Coretta Scott King and John Steptoe New Talent award-winning author of books about a curious science kid, Brendan Buckley's universe and everything in it and its sequel, twin sisters who look nothing alike, the other half of my heart, and an irresistible 10-year-old entrepreneur, Cleo Edison Oliver, whose superpower is getting people to buy whatever she's selling. Her forthcoming novel was inspired by her African-American family's integrating into a white neighborhood in 1950s Spokane. She lives near Seattle, Washington with her husband and 2 daughters. Please help me in welcoming Sundee Frazier.
Hi, everyone. Erik, first of all, it was so great to hear about your background and what led to what you do, your art, and it's beautiful, and it's so fun to see different artists and writers' work. Mine is very different. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what my childhood was like and then how I became a novelist. So I write longer books for kids who are in the realm of 8 to 13 years old. So those are my books. But first of all, when I was a kid, we moved around a lot, all in Washington State, but we did move around. So every couple of years, I was once again the new kid at school. So if you know what that feels like, it's kind of lonely. You got to make new friends every couple of years when you move. Another important part of my experience is my dad is Black and my mom is white, which makes me both, or biracial, Black and white. Now, I didn't think about this a whole lot as a kid. It's just who I was. My family was my family, and what I now call my Black, brown, white, beautiful family. But every now and then, something would happen that made my difference stand out. When I was very young, for example, maybe in 1st or 2nd grade, I was out on the playground playing and I fell down and scraped my knee and I started to bleed. And there were some kids that gathered around. I remember very distinctly being on the ground and my knee was bleeding and there were kids kind of crowding in. And one of them pointed at my leg and she said, "I thought they had blue blood." And I remember noticing like, oh, she thinks I'm different from the rest of them. Now, they all happened to be white children, and I had kind of brown skin. And later, as I thought about that, I thought, wow, maybe because I had a different color skin on the outside, they thought maybe the color on the inside would be different. I have no idea where they got that idea, but maybe they heard that from someone or they just made an assumption. But it definitely kind of made me realize, oh, they see me as different. Or another time, I was in the 6th grade. And my dad, who's Black, and I were outside, and he was cutting the shrubs. We were doing some yard work, and a neighbor boy who came over, and he told a very racist joke to my dad, something mean about Black people. And I remember noticing right away, my dad got very angry and told him to leave, to get away. So there were things that would happen like that helped me to cause me to see, oh, I'm kind of different. My family's kind of different from those of us around us. Well, some of the books I loved as a kid, let me talk about that, what I read as a kid. I loved books because the characters in the books, the kids in the books, felt like friends to me. They became like friends to me. And remember, I moved around a lot. And so books were a place where I could find friends who would always be there and I could always return to and who were safe. And often the kids in the books, honestly, they seemed a little bit lonely, like I felt, but they were also very brave, like I wanted to be. So my faves were often books that had elements of fantasy, but set in realistic settings. So I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, have heard of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. That was my absolute favorite book. I just loved all of Roald Dahl's books, James and the Giant Peach, but those kids like Charlie in the Chocolate Factory, he was kind of lonely, right? But then amazing things would happen to them. And I wanted that to be true for me too. Another favorite book The Phantom Toll Booth. I loved this book about this little boy, Milo, who receives a car and a toll booth in the mail. And he has to put it together and assemble it. And when he does, he gets in the car and he drives past the toll booth. He enters into this fantastical realm, this other world where he gets to go on adventures. I loved books like that. And then my other very favorite series was a book probably none of you have ever heard of. It was about a girl detective named Trixie Belden. I'm a little bit older than the others here, I think. And so this is a book. She was a girl detective, and I just ate up this series. I loved mysteries. Maybe some of you like mysteries too. So I loved books where amazing things happened to kids, and kids made amazing things happen, even solved crimes. I wanted to be able to do that. One thing I never saw in a book when I was a kid was a black, brown, white, beautiful family like mine, or a biracial black and white kid like me. So that's what I grew up to write. I grew up to write these books that have at the very center of them biracial kids or black kids who live in interracial families. This is my book about twins, one of whom happens to look more black, like her mom, and one of whom ends up looking more white, like her dad, and how their close relationship gets put to the test when they travel south to visit their black grandma. Or this is Cleo Edison Oliver. She's my entrepreneur kid. If you like businesses and making money, you'll probably love Cleo, but she's a spunky kid who lives in a black, white, brown family because of adoption. She's been adopted. Now, Brendan Buckley was my first novel that got published. And it features a boy whose dad is black and mom is white, just like mine. And Brendan is really curious, just like me. And he's interested in science and especially rocks, which is true about me as well. I wanted to be a geologist when I was in 6th grade. So he has this notebook called Brendan Buckley's Book of Big Questions about life, the universe, and everything in it. And he's always asking questions, kind of like me. But the one thing he knows not to ask about is the white grandpa he's never met, and he doesn't know why. And his mom won't talk about him. It's the big family secret. So the story gets really interesting when he meets the president of a local rock and mineral club at a rock and mineral exhibit in the mall and comes to find out that this man is the grandpa he's never met and his mom won't talk about. So, of course, Brendan has to find out more. He builds a secret friendship with his grandpa to find out the truth about where this man has been all of Brendan's life. Turns out he's only lived 10 miles away his whole life and he didn't know it. But he stumbles into him and then he builds this secret friendship to find out the truth. Because kids, you all are honest and truthful and brave and you want real answers to tough questions. And that's who Brendan is. There are some funny scenes like when Brendan and his buddy Calfani have a contest to see who has the bigger bladder. They actually do an experiment because, Brendan is a scientist, of course. So they drink lots and lots and lots of water and pee into 2-liter bottles to see. There are some action adventure scenes like when Brendan and his grandpa that he's just met, his white grandpa, go on a rock hunting expedition and one of them ends up in life and death danger. And then there's some great Taekwondo scenes because my nephew in actual life was doing Taekwondo at the time. So I gave Brendan that skill, that passion of Taekwondo. And there are some scenes based on my real life experiences, like when Brendan and Calfani encounter some bullies in the park and Brendan gets cut. And one of the bullies makes a joke about how he thought they had purple blood. So you see what I did there? It's my story that I told you about earlier from when I was a little kid. I put it in my book with some details changed, of course. And that's what we do as writers. We take our own experiences and then turn them into stories that you can enjoy. And I just wanted to encourage you that I think I have a couple minutes left, maybe one. If you too, okay. If you're interested in being a writer, there's a couple things you can do. Erik showed you the list that he made, a very easy way to start. You could also ask the question, what if? What if is always a great question for writers to ask. And it's what I asked to write Brendan. I asked because I found out in my family there was something that had happened where my white grandparents didn't want to have anything to do with my parents when they got married to each other. But when I was born, they had already changed their minds, and I grew up knowing them as very loving and accepting people. But I asked the question, what if my white grandparents hadn't changed their minds and I'd grown up not knowing them? That's where that story came from. I wrote another story when I was just getting started called Tennessee's Vegetable Crusade, the picture book. I'm not an illustrator like Erik, but I tried my best and it was a lot of fun. But I asked the question, what if my vegetables talked to me? What would happen? I wrote another story in 5th grade when I was your age. Some of you might be in 5th grade, about 4 kids who find a time machine and travel into the future, where they discover that all the primates, the apes and monkeys, have been forced to do people's work. And that was from a question, what if kids found a time machine? What would happen? You could ask yourself that question. What if I found a time machine? What would happen? So ask that question. One last thing. You might ask, what is something that makes you feel a little different, or that does make you different from others around you, like being a new kid or being from a mixed race family like myself? What is something that makes you feel a little different that you could write a story about? Give that a shot and see what comes out. So those are a few of my tips for how you can write stories. And thanks so much for listening. I look forward to seeing what kind of questions you have for us.
Hey, thank you so much, Sundee. Okay, up next is Danga Meinhart. Dan's the author of 5 middle grade novels, most set in the Pacific Northwest, including The Honest Truth and most recently, The Remarkable Journey of Coyote Sunrise. He was an elementary teacher librarian in Wenatchee for 13 years and now lives with his wife and 3 daughters in Kashmir. Help me in welcoming Danga Meinhart.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And thank you to NCRL for hosting this and making this happen. And thanks to all you for joining in and listening to us. And of course, to my esteemed fellow panelists. I'm really glad we could pull this together. This is awesome. I love talking about books more than almost anything, whether the ones I wrote or even better yet, ones I didn't write. So I'm super excited for this. So actually, one of my themes of the stories that I read, and thus the stories that I write, is exactly the same as Sundee's, in that a big part of me as a person, a big part of my childhood, a big part of the kind of reader and writer I am, came out of the fact that as a kid, my family moved around a lot. We moved like every year, sometimes more than once a year. And we also occasionally lived in Spokane, like I hear you did. We lived there a couple of different times in a couple different places. And so just like her, for my whole childhood, I was always the new kid. Like I said, we moved once a year, sometimes more than once a year. I went to like 8 different elementary schools. And that can be great. It can be really fun to see new places and meet new people. But of course, like you said, it can also be kind of sad and scary to always be leaving your friends behind and always having to try to make new friends and always walking into classrooms full of strangers. So that was a kind of an interesting way to grow up. And out of that, a lot of things came, but most relevantly, out of that came my love of books and my love of reading, because books were like the one constant thing in my life. Everything else in my life was always changing, friends and schools and teachers and houses. But wherever I went, books were always there, and books were always there for me. So my favorite room in every school was always the library, still is, because I could walk into a new school on my first day, and everything in that new school would be different. Different hallways, different teachers, different kids, but every school that I went to had a library, thank goodness. And the libraries were pretty much the same. So if I walked along the shelf and looked at the spines of the books, even though everything else in this place was different, I could find stories that I had read before and stories that I loved and stories that I wanted to read again. And just like Sundee said, those stories to me felt like friends. And sometimes those stories were my only friends. If it was my first couple of weeks there, I didn't have any friends yet, but I had stories. And so journeys are a big part of me as a reader. And the second theme, kind of me as a reader, is family. Because when you move around so much, like, you really cling to the things that are constant. And books was one, and my family was another. My family is and was great, stuck together. And even though we had kind of an unstable life, we were very happy together. And so I loved stories that had journeys, and I loved stories that had families. And so some of the books, I was trying to remember some of the stories that I loved as a kid, a lot of which aren't even around anymore, because books for young readers have gotten so amazing in the last 15, 20 years. And so a lot of the books I read as a kid aren't on the shelves anymore, and for good reason. But some of the ones that still might be, that have a journey element or a family element. There was a book called, I don't have a copy to hold up, The Incredible Journey. which was a story about a cat and two dogs who got separated from their owner and went on this amazing journey all the way across, was it Canada? I should know this. So across the country to reunite with their family. Along the way, they face other bad guys, other animals and wild animals. And I just loved it. It made it into a movie, I think. I remember seeing the movie like in the early 90s. But it was an awesome story. I read that book probably 6 times. You'd think I'd remember the details better. But I love that. It's a journey story, and those animals are a family, right? Even though they're different kinds of animals, they're totally a family. So it had those two things that I loved so much, journey and family. And another one that I love, which is only the family part, I love the books of Beverly Cleary. Beverly Cleary is amazing. And she's just a giant in kidlit. And, she wrote like the Ramona Quimby books and the Henry books and the Ribsy books and the Beeses books. She's awesome. And my family would read those together. My mom would read out loud to us. And I loved the families and the relationships in those stories. And another one that had a big influence on me as a kid, which has no family, but lots of journey, even though there's not actually a journey, bear with me, is Hatchet by Gary Paulsen, which has just been like a classic forever. My teacher read it to us in the 5th grade, and I loved it. I read it again myself in the 6th grade and probably the 7th grade. I read it again as an adult. It's a kid who gets in a plane crash out in the woods and has to survive all by himself. He doesn't go anywhere except that first chapter, but it's very much an internal journey and an external journey. He's out of his element. He's away from home. He's all alone, and he has to learn how to survive by himself. And that was a huge influence on me. So those themes, as a reader, as a human being, as a kid, definitely impacted the stories I write. If you look at all 5 of my books, so Coyote Sunrise, Good Dogs, Scar Island, Honest Truth, and Some Kind of Courage, they are all journey stories. None of them take place in the kid's house, in the kid's town. They're all on their way somewhere or far away from their home. Especially the remarkable journey of Coyote Sunrise, which is an entirely travel story of a girl going on this quest across America to find something that means the world to her, and to save a piece of her family. And if you look at all of my books, especially Coyote Sunrise, but really all of them, besides being journey stories, they're all also family stories. Not so much The Honest Truth. The Honest Truth is pretty much a solo story. Family is an important part of it. Family is a theme of it. All the rest of them, this one is all about this girl and her dad and them trying to make their family work and trying to make their life work in a kind of a dysfunctional way. And it's about her grieving the family that she's lost. Because when this story starts, she's living with her dad in this old school bus. Her mom and her sisters were killed in a car accident. And so it's very, very much about family, and the journey and the family are tied together. Some Kind of Courage, same thing. It's a kid on the journey across the kind of the Washington frontier. And he is trying to kind of hold on to the last piece of family he has. Scar Island is a kid who gets sent to like a prison reform school. So it's a different kind of journey. But he has a big family story in his backstory, but he also forms a new family with the other kids in this horrible prison location, and they become a kind of family of their own. And so those themes that I was reaching for as a kid, as a human being, and as a reader, definitely come out in my stories that I write and that I read. I like journey stories, and I like stories that say something about the people who are around us and how we are connected to them. So that's kind of me as a writer, me as a reader. Now, you as a writer, no matter what age you are, I was trying to think about, okay, if I can tie these themes together, and I did or tried to, that in my mind, writing, no matter what kind of writing you're doing, is also kind of like a journey. And I think of it as a journey, just like the stories I read and the stories I write. And there's kind of 3 kind of ways I mean that. One being, and Sundy was just talking about this beautifully, way better than I could talk about it, is so if you think of writing a story, so it can be really intimidating when you're starting off. Like, it seems like a big deal to write a whole book or write a whole story. And am I going to go the wrong way? Am I going to get lost? Am I going to have writer's block? Maybe. But the first step in a journey, the writing journey, is to go where you want to go, or to try to go where you want to go. And by that, I mean, tell the stories that you want to tell. Don't tell a story because you think whatever, it'll sell, or you think people will like it. Whatever kind of stories you like to read, are the kinds of stories you should write. So if you weren't going to be writing a story, if you were going to be sitting there reading a story, what kind of story would you want to read? Do you love cool science fiction, Star Wars kind of stuff? Do you love, softer stories about people dealing with internal stuff, with grief and divorce and loss and stuff? Do you love magical adventures? Or do you love true nonfiction books? You pick your destination. You pick the one that you would be the most excited to go to. And by that, I just mean the kind of story that you want to write, because you're going to go a lot farther with it. You're going to work a lot harder on it, and you're going to have more fun writing it. So even fan fiction, or if you want to do silly cartoons and comics like Captain Underpants, if that's what you love, that's what you should do. That's your journey. The second thing is that you are almost certainly going to hit some rough patches. You're going to hit some obstacles. You're going to fall down. That does not mean you're doing it wrong. Just the opposite. If you finish a whole book and never have any problems, you're probably doing it wrong, because there should be things that come up and things you struggle with. But that doesn't mean you're failing. That means you're moving. If you never go anywhere, you're never going to hit an obstacle, right? So when those bad things happen, don't give up. Don't get frustrated. Don't get discouraged, or don't get so discouraged that you quit. Keep at it. Keep your eye on the destination. Keep moving forward. Sometimes on a journey, you have to travel uphill, and sometimes it's really hard. Sometimes on a journey, you get stuck in the mud, and you can't just sit there in the mud or go back. You've got to pull your feet out and keep going forward. That's okay. Sometimes writing is fun. It's the coolest thing in the world. Sometimes writing is really hard, and I don't like it at all. That's part of the journey. It's always worth it when you get there. And I see I've got 40 seconds left. My third point of writing as a journey, you telling your own stories, is that you might get lost along the way. You might not get where you thought you were going. Stories can change as you're writing them, but that's okay too, because it's the journey that counts. If you tell a story that matters to you, and if you have more or less a good time writing it, that's all that really matters. And then once you've made it to the end, now you can write a map, because revision is a big part of the writing process, going back and making it better. And it's a part that a lot of people don't like, and it can be really hard. But once you've got to the end, you can look back and you can see, oh, I took a misstep there. Oh, it would have been better if I would have gone left there instead of right there. I would have gotten here quicker and easier. So once you're done, you know where you're at. And then you can really look back at your journey and fix your steps to make it as good as it can be. And that revising, for some people, is not the fun part, but for me, it is the fun part. Because if I love the story this much and I want it to be this good, and if I'm honest with myself and it's only this good, it feels really good to work on it and see that story be as good as it can be. So once you're done, then you can really start working on making that story, that journey, turn out just like you wanted it to. So that is the end of my 10 minutes, me as a writer, me as a reader, and you as a writer. And now we are on to the illimitable Kelly Milner Halls.
Thank you so much, Dan. Okay, let's see here. So Kelly Milner Halls has written nonfiction for young readers for almost 30 years. She has more than 1,000 articles and 55 books published, including books about Bigfoot, UFOs, ghosts, dinosaurs, dogs, horses, mummies. But her next 3 books will explore World War II and the Titanic. Kelly lives in Spokane, Washington with 2 daughters, a Great Dane named Abby, and 2 mini rescue kittens, but who's counting? Everyone help me welcome Kelly.
Hi, you guys. Oh, mine says unmute myself. Can you hear me? Excellent. My name is Kelly Milner Halls. I am the nonfiction writer in the group, and I love nonfiction. Why do I love nonfiction? Because I was a wild and crazy little child. I grew up in a place called Houston, Texas, and it was a very rural community, and there was nothing to do but go outside. But outside was my favorite place to be. My mother would put me in steel-toe boots, say, go outside, come home when you hear your dad whistle, and I'd stay gone all day long. I explored the natural world. I did it with my very best friend, a boy named Craig Bottoms. Yes, his last name was Bottoms. And he was my best friend, and we caught critters, and we looked for bones, and we made forts, and we were outside all the time. And when I started school and they started trying to make me learn how to read, I thought it was nonsense. I had more important things to do. I needed to go outside. And I thought reading was so much work because you had to sound out the words, and then you had to put the words together to make a sentence. And then you had to glue all those sentences together to read a book. And I thought, who has time for that? I hated it. So the only books I enjoyed were books like this one. Reptiles and Amphibians. This was my second copy of the book. I got my first copy when I was 4 years old, because that's when we moved to Friendswood, Texas, a suburb of Houston. And all the poisonous snakes in North America thrive in Friendswood, Texas. So my mother bought me this book, and she circled all the venomous snakes and said, "Don't touch those. Have a nice time." I never would have had that courage if my girls were growing up in Houston, Texas. This is my second copy. I don't know if you can see. Do you see the cursive writing on top? Woohoo! I learned how to write cursive, but this was what made me fall in love with reading. This was what made me realize that there was something worth discovering in a book. And this is my first favorite book. And that's part of why I write nonfiction, because there wasn't a lot of nonfiction available for kids when I was young, because I grew up in the 60s. I'm very old. Sundee, I'm pretty sure I'm older than you even. But nonfiction was my passion. That was something that was worth the work. And picture books, which may be why Erik and I get along so well. One of my favorite picture books, and I had to search to find another copy of this, was called So Small, because I was a little tiny kid. I was always the shortest kid in my school class, and I hated it. You're so little, you're so small, you can't run, you can't do anything. So my parents got me this book, So Small, about a little teeny mouse. He was too small and saved his whole family. And I thought, see, being small can come in handy sometimes. So I like picture books and I like nonfiction. But I didn't like fiction. I just didn't like the work. And then I went to third grade, and I went and I had a great teacher named Miss Grayson. And Miss Grayson, she was a really great teacher. She noticed that I wasn't a behavior problem. I was partially deaf. All these teachers until then thought I wasn't paying attention because I was a little obnoxious kid. And yeah, I was a little obnoxious. But I also wasn't hearing. She caught that. And then she caught that I was having trouble getting excited about reading. So you know what she did? She picked the perfect read aloud book. She picked Charlotte's Web. And that was a book about a little girl who loved animals and outside more than anything else in the world. She was like me. And when Miss Grayson read that out loud, I was able to hear what a story was supposed to sound like. And until then, I just didn't get it, unless it was a picture book. When she read that out loud, I fell in love with fiction. But I don't write fiction because I'm not very good at it. I've written 2 fiction books. I don't talk about them because I don't think they're very good. I like nonfiction. So one of my very first nonfiction books, you might not be surprised, was about dinosaurs. Because to me, dinosaurs are big lizards, and I used to catch lizards all the time. I love dinosaurs. Now I've written 6 books about dinosaurs. This was only one of them. And then I remembered that my best friend, Craig Bottoms, he sent me a scary postcard once. He went on vacation to Mesa Verde in Colorado, and they had a mummy in the gift store. Now, if we find a mummy, we study them, and then we repatriate them. That means we bury them again. That's a respectful thing to do. But they didn't do that when I was a kid. They stood them up in a corner of a gift shop, and they sold postcards. And Craig sent me the mummy postcard. And it scared me and fascinated me all at once. And I said, "Dad, it's a dead guy." My dad said, "Yeah, it is." And I said, "What was his name? Where did he work? Did he have a job? Did he have a family? What was his wife's name?" My dad would say, "Go away. I asked too many questions. I made my teachers insane asking questions and my parents insane asking questions. I never got my mummy answers." So when I decided to write books for kids, nonfiction books for kids, you can be sure that I wrote a book about mummies. Because then I didn't have to be afraid. Then I knew the information. It's funny. You may be afraid of something you don't understand, but the minute you understand it, it's not so scary. And that's what I've lived my life doing, writing nonfiction books about a lot of the things that I was afraid of when I was a kid. Another thing that I wrote, and it's my most famous book, was Tales of the Cryptids. Mysterious animals that may or may not exist. I thought people were lying to kids about Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster, and I was going to prove they were all fake. Except I couldn't do it, because some were fake and some might be real. So it amazed me and started me on another journey about cryptozoology, which leads me to one of my new books, which is more cryptozoology, because kids kept asking me, when are we going to get more? We want more. Please give us more. So I gave them more. I listened to the kids that read my books because they're the kids I was. They're exactly who I grew up to be. And I love those kind of books. Now, this is one of my newest books. My other newest book is Death Eaters. Yes, the title was inspired by Harry Potter, but it is not a fantasy book. It is a book about scavengers, the cleanup crew that eats dead stuff. How disgusting is that? Perfect for a Kelly Milner Halls book. Because if it makes you go, what the heck? Or if it makes you go, ooh, gross, then that could be a book I'm going to write. I'm working on a new book called 100 True Stories About Poop. I haven't sold it yet, but I will. I won't give up. Because you learn a lot from poop. Who knew? I like those things, but I've just started a new phase in my life, and that's more traditional nonfiction. Voices of Ordinary Heroes, World War II. And I did another one called Voices of Kid Heroes, kids who did amazing things during World War II. And the new one will be about the mysteries of the Titanic. I'm doing traditional nonfiction history. Who would have thought? But I'm not done with weird stuff. Like the poop book, honestly, it will still be coming. I love weird things. I get paid for being weird. And when a kid can pick up a book that's weird like they are and feel okay, feel like they have a community, a tribe, then I've done my job. Because my job is to help kids to know they are exactly who they're meant to be, exactly the way they are. And that's been my life as a writer. Thank you very much. Now I think we have time for questions and answers, don't we?
Yes, we do. Okay, so let me remind everyone about how questions and answers is going to work. Thank you so much, Kelly.
Oh, my pleasure.
Okay, so we're going to be asking the authors some questions now. Remember that you can type your questions by clicking on the Q&A button on your screen. And again, while we might not have time for everyone's questions, we'll try to get to as many as we can. So please type in those questions. Okay. There we go. All right, so we did get a question. Let me just find it here. Okay. If you all could tell your younger self anything, what would you say? If you could travel back or send a letter back in time to tell your younger self something, what would it be? And just go ahead and throw out your answer. We'll just pass it around.
I'll start. I was like Sundy and Dan. I had to move about every 9 months. And I was lonely all the time. So if I could write back to the kid that I was, I would say, dive into whatever experience you see in front of you. Don't worry about what you don't have. Worry about what you do have. And realize that you are okay just the way you are, no matter what changes happen. That's what I'd say.
Yeah, I would say something similar. And actually, a lot of us touched on this, that it's easy when you're a grown-up, a boring old dusty grown-up, to idolize childhood. It's this wonderful time where you're eating popsicles and you're playing outside. And it's a lot of times it is that. It's great to be a kid, but sometimes it's also really hard to be a kid. And you can feel really sad and you can feel really lonely. And when someone says something mean to you, I was bullied a lot in certain parts of my life, and that can feel awful. So I would have a similar message to Kelly, that you're going to get through it. It gets better. That things can feel so bad when they feel bad. When you feel like no one's on your side, that feels awful. But there's always the next day. There's always getting through it. That things generally, hopefully, turn out. And to believe in yourself, like you said, Kelly, you are the person you're meant to be. And what you are is great. Believe in yourself. Stick through it. You're going to be pretty happy as an adult. So these dark days aren't as dark as they seem. And also, you should probably invest in Apple stock. That's what I would tell you.
I think I would tell myself to listen to the dreams that are inside of me. And I actually, when I was about 9 years old, I apparently told my mom that I wanted to write a book and get it published. But I really have no memory of that. But thanks to my mom, saving the evidence. I had written it down in this book about me, actually. And so that's kind of cool. So I would encourage you, I'll just show you the page real quick. I would encourage you to listen to the dreams that you have, because they've been put into you for a reason. And it's very likely, kind of like what Kelly was saying, the things that you're really fascinated by, the things that you're really interested in are clues as to why you are here in the world and what it is that you're meant to do. I'm not finding the page right now. Oh, here it is. Here it is. So when I was 9 years old, I filled out this book about me. It's a Dr. Seuss thing. And on one page, you could write about what you want to be when you grow up. And I wrote, when I grow up, I want to be a famous writer. I don't know about the famous part, but I am a writer. And thanks to my mom saving this, now I can see that it was already in me at 9 years old. That was my 9-year-old handwriting. So listen to the things that you love to do, pay attention to that, and just pursue those things all out with a passion, and don't worry about whether other people tell you you can or cannot do those things. Just really enjoy them and get better at them and work at them. And it's very, very possible that those things that are in your heart right now to do are a clue as to what you will do when you get older.
Yeah, and I'll chime in. I guess I should have started off this way, but I moved about 5 or 6 times between first grade and 10th grade. So there's definitely an undercurrent here of our moving and sort of finding friends. And I mean, I can still remember being a 9th grader and moving for that last time before my sophomore year in high school and being in tears, at my new high school or whatnot. But the thing I think, and this showed up for me in a book I wrote called Later Gator. Later Gator is a way to say goodbye, but in that book, Gator turns those goodbyes into hellos. And I think just no matter where you are at and sort of what is happening, like trying to step out and trying to say hello, trying to sort of put yourself out there. And I think the thing that goes hand in hand with that is maybe when you're a kid, like doing too much is a good thing. Like I know there are times in my life when I thought I'm doing too many things. I'm a jack of all trades and a master of none. But at the same time, I think like doing a lot and whatever it is, like just sampling, trying different activities, trying different, things you want to read or things you want to like play in sports and whatever else. Like there's plenty of time in your life to be a specialist. So when you're a kid, you should be doing lots of things. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you all. Another question that we got was, if you weren't authors, what other profession or other kinds of journey do you think you would have gone down?
Ooh, I would be a park ranger.
Oh my gosh, that was one of mine too. Oh.
I love nature and the outdoors.
Yeah, I think that being a wildlife biologist or someone working with animals would be my sort of track on that side too.
I'd be a wildlife photographer. That's what I say in another life. I want to come back and be a wildlife photographer.
I would definitely be what I was very happily for 13 years. I would be an elementary school librarian. It was the best job in the world. Only very reluctantly did I leave it. I love being a teacher. I really, really miss being a teacher and being part of a team and working with awesome teachers and working with awesome kids, most of all. And writing is great. I'm super lucky to be doing this for a living, but it's like me sitting alone in this room. And like being a teacher, you're surrounded by 500 awesome people every day. So I would definitely go back to being a teacher, and I hope to go back to being a teacher someday for sure.
You were so good at it.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, another question that we got was, do you read each other's books? And did you all know each other before today?
I've read all of Dan's books. They're awesome. You should definitely read them.
Thank you.
and I've read several of Kelly's, but she's written too many.
I'm excited to read more of your books after hearing you talk about them for sure. I've only met Dan personally before this because our books were up for the Washington State Book Award at the same time. Cleo was also nominated, and Erik, I believe maybe it was the same year that you got Polar Opposites. I can't remember, for Washington State Book Award. So that's maybe where we saw each other. Dan won the award. I was a nominee and he beat me out, but I was totally happy for him to do that because I know his books are awesome and kids love his books. And I was just honored to be there.
Yeah, and I have read, well, thank you very much, Sundy. It was super fun. And I have read, yes, I have not read every book by all three of these awesome authors, but I have read at least 2 books by all of these authors. Yeah, both, again, because I was a kids librarian for 13 years, and so I read a ton of books as that job. So yeah, they're all awesome authors, and everyone should read all their books for sure.
It is too, and let me just add this, like, it's an extremely great thing, working as an author and illustrator, to like do your research by like reading other people's books, right? Like, I mean, I love, and one of the reasons I really thought that being an author or an illustrator would be something I would enjoy is because I loved going to bookstores and just knowing there's like 1,000 different ways you can illustrate a book. And you can look at all these different people illustrating and doing just so many different sort of things with their illustrations. And you can learn so much by reading and sort of looking at other books. It's really cool. So, yeah.
And I've known Dan and Erik for quite a while. I went to Dan's school when he was a librarian and did a school presentation. And I went to Erik's daughter's school, and he ran a festival, which is great. This is my first encounter with Sundee, but I had seen her books before, and I had thought, I got to read that book. And I can't wait. It gives me all kinds of new material that I can dig into. And it is summer, so I will have time. So I have read Dan's books, and I've read a lot of Erik's books, and I am about to read Sundee's books because they look fantastic.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you. Another question was, do you have any new books coming out of quarantine? So with quarantine, did you have new time to work on a book and you'll have a book coming out of that time period?
I've written 3 books since quarantine started in March. They were very fast turnarounds, but they were great. Those are the World War II books and the Titanic book.
My productivity was not high during quarantine. I've got a wife who's a teacher and 3 school-age daughters who are all suddenly home, and my office was the workspace, and they all had different Zooms at different times every day, and this was the best room to Zoom in, and this is the best computer to Zoom on. So I've gotten a lot of family time the last 4 months, which is wonderful. I feel really, really lucky to have all this time with my family, but I've gotten very little writing. I did finish a book that I was working on and sent it off, so I'm starting, and it got a yes, so that's good. It's going to come out in 2022. Publishing is a very slow business. So I've got the revising on that to do now. But I was already like 90% done with that. So that was just a matter of timing. But quarantine has been a wonderful family challenge, but not a great writing time.
I don't know if y'all can see here, but this is my writing space. It is the first floor of my house, and I'm just divided from the rest of the house with a screen. So I don't actually have an office with a closed door. So it makes, again, it tough when everyone is at home. I've been retreating upstairs into our family music studio. My husband's a musician, and that's the one room where I can close the door. But it's very dark in there, and I didn't want to do my Zoom from there, but that is where I've been writing. I have fortunately had the opportunity to start a chapter book series during quarantine, and I finished book 1 of that. I'm excited about it. It has not yet sold yet, but it's about 4 kids who are on a science fair team, and they travel through time and space to visit different times and places and see the effects of climate change, being led by a really cool eccentric meteorologist who leads them on these travels. A little bit like maybe Magic School Bus meets Magic Tree House with a climate change twist. And an interesting thing, though, I got to give credit where credit's due. I have a co-author, and he came up with the concept, and I'm writing the first book. So it's my first chance to actually work with another author, and I've never done that before. So I'm excited to see how that all works out. But we've got 4 books in the works, and we're going to try selling them and see where that goes. And then I did finish my novel, which will come out in fall of 21, and I'm revising that now. And that's the one based on my Black family living in Spokane, Washington. They were pioneers there came in the early 1900s, but a very, very small Black community in Spokane. And I grew up visiting them and being a part of that community there. And so I'm writing a book based on some of their experiences.
I can't wait to read that.
And with respect to quarantine, I started 2 years ago teaching art at a high school junior high. So I'm trying to strike again that balance between working on my own things and the teaching. And the teaching got to be extremely hard trying to do it remotely. But I will say that I ended up with a little bit a little bit more time, just it felt like more my own because I wasn't managing a classroom, even though I was in the classroom and teaching. And I started working on a picture book idea that was actually inspired by some conversations I had with an 8th grader, called Chicken on Belay, about a rock climbing chicken. And then just another thing too, as an illustrator, sometimes I get story ideas, or I like to just play around with art styles. And in addition to teaching this spring, I took an online class from a graffiti artist in Seattle. And then just one of the little exercises I gave, just a creative exercise to my students, was taking these little watercolor blobs and just sort of looking at them and trying to find things in them. And so I have been playing around with this style that's a little looser and a little different for sure than my usual things, but this quarantine time, has given a little bit of opportunity for some exploration among all the other more practical things. So
very
That's
cool.
Great. Yeah, very cool. So the last little question, which I can just answer, is whether your books are available online through our library collections. And yes, you can find copies of the author's books through our online collections, either Overdrive or Hoopla. So just search the author's names and some of their books will pop up there. And then I just wanted to give kind of some closing information about some future author events. So I wanted to thank Dan, Erik, Kelly, and Sundee for joining us today. And yeah, many of the author's books are available to check out through Overdrive and Hoopla. So just go to ncrl.org and you'll be able to find those there. You can also check out the blog post about this event, and that lists out all the books we have available from these authors. We hope you join us again in the future for other virtual author visits. You can join us on Tuesday, July 28th at 7 p.m. to hear from Blake Crouch. And then in August, you'll be able to hear from Ijoma Alua and Jason Reynolds. So check our website, ncl.org, for more info about that. I hope you all had a wonderful afternoon, and thank you again for joining us. And we'll see you next time. Thanks for attending, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all.